Okay guys, in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to slab build utilizing our CircleMatic templates. Our CircleMatic templates come in lots of different shapes and sizes, but I'm using some of the larger shapes today because I'm going to be trying to build a picture, and you'll notice that our templates are flat, but to help us kind of figure out what our shape is going to be once we build it out of clay, I like to tape them to the side and see what shapes they make when you stack them. So you'll see that I already have this one taped, and you can just use some masking tape. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you'll see how when I stack these together, without a handle, it creates kind of like this base shape. So I already have my slabs rolled and prepped. There's another video on how to use the slab roller and get a nice even slab for building if you need to go back and watch that. So the templates that I'm using to create this shape are the eye templates, and I'm going to be using both eye templates, one for the top and one for the bottom. It's important that when once you have your slab, that you've rolled it the correct size for your template to fit. Now this slab, it fits perfect with the template, but just barely. So I'm going to need to be very cautious with how I arrange the template onto the slab. So I think that just barely fits, but it fits perfectly. So I'm going to use a cutting tool to go through and trace around the slab to get my shape. It's important that when you're cutting, that you're really kind of pressing up against that template to help you have a nice, even, clean side. And it's also very important that when you're holding the cutting tool, that you're holding it at the same angle the entire time. There might be times where you want to have more of a beveled edge and you hold the cutting tool at an angle, but other times you're going to want a really nice, sharp, straight edge, and kind of like what I'm doing now, you want to make sure that you're holding your cutting tool perfectly vertical to give you a nice, even edge. You may need to clean your tool of excess clay before you make your next cut. Notice that I'm holding down the template as I work, so I don't have to worry about it sliding. And then I'm just going to remove the excess clay. I'm planning on this slab to be the bottom of my vessel. So I've rolled this slab just slightly thicker, not by a whole bunch, but slightly thicker. I'm going to go back and trim this edge a little bit to straighten it up. Just slightly thicker than the slab that I'm going to be placing on top. So that way the slab that I'm going to be placing on top will have a little bit of a thicker surface to set, and for helping giving me some more room for smoothing. So now that I have the template cut, I can remove the template, and you see my nice even clay slab here. I'm going to set this to the side real quick, and then you always want to make sure that whenever you have your clay scraps like this, that you are immediately taking it and folding it into itself and re-wedging it, because y'all know by now that the clay, it tends to dry out really quickly, and once it dries out, it's really not very workable, and you have to go back through and kind of re-wet it and reconstitute it, and that just takes a lot of time. So to help me save our clay and to help make sure that it's workable when you come into class, it's good to go ahead and take your scraps and wedge them into a cube, and then go ahead and get it put back into the clay bag, the plastic bag, and wrap it up airtight so we can reuse this. Okay, so then the next part that I'm going to do is I need to prep the edges that are going to wrap around and touch. So we're going to end up taking the clay slab and wrapping it around, but I want the edges to have a very nice, smooth surface when they kind of butt up next to each other, and to do that you need to bevel the edges. So I'm going to take my carving tool again, and like I mentioned before, when you need to bevel an edge, you want to hold this carving tool at an angle. And then you're just going to slice off that top part. Okay, now what you do not want to do is cut at the same exact angle on this side, because then they're going to be going in the same direction and they're not going to match up really well. So what you'll need to do is make sure that you flip your slab and then cut the other edge at that same angle. This way they'll meet up real nicely. Just like that. And like before, you want to take your extra clay and go ahead, wedge it together, and you can put it with the bag of the other clay. Okay, and then before we ever attach our pieces together, I want to go ahead and prep the surface of the clay and smooth it out, because it's going to be a lot more difficult to do that once we've created our shape. So I'm going to take these rib tools. I like working with both sizes, but for right now, we're doing a fairly large surface, so I'm going to use the larger rib tool, and I'm just going to gently rub it over the clay to help smooth out this canvas texture that was created when I was rolling the slab. And it does have a few lines in here, so I'm going to go back with my hands and smooth out and really protect that surface. Perfect that surface. And then I'm going to take my pointer finger and go through and smooth these edges at the bottom and at the top. So we have nice smooth surface. There looks like there could have been a little bit of an air bubble here in my clay. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back over it a little bit more and compress that to make sure that it stays nice and smooth, and to make sure that I don't see any actual air bubbles bubbling up at the surface of the clay. If you see that, it's not a big deal. You can take a sharp tool and kind of poke it and then smooth it back out. Okay, I'm going to flip the slab. When you're flipping the slab, it's important that you're holding it very gently and that you're not pinching it, because you don't want to be able to see any of your finger indentions into the slab. And then I'm going to take the rib tool again and smooth that canvas texture out of the slab. In my opinion, this side is looking a lot smoother and nicer than the other side. So I think I'm going to use this as the outside of my vessel. And then I'm going to go back through and smooth again with my fingers really quickly, just to perfect that surface. And now I think that we might be ready to go ahead and slip and score and then fold this in to make our shape. But since this is a larger slab, because I am using, I think, the largest template that we have within the CircleMatics, I want to make sure that the dry rate of the clay is dry enough to be able to be stable to hold the shape without it being flimsy and collapsing, but I also want to make sure it's not too dry, so when I curve it, it's not creating little cracks in it. So I'm just going to test that out right now to see if I think it's going to keep the shape well. And with just setting it up like this, I can already tell that the clay is dry enough that I think it's going to be sturdy enough to go ahead and keep its shape. So I don't think I need to take the hair dryer to it and dry it out anymore. If it was feeling really flimsy or wanting to collapse on the side, you could take your hair dryer and dry it just a little bit to set it up a little bit more. So what I'm going to do now, since I already have it set like this, I'm just going to score and slip with it already set like this, so I'm not over handling it too much. So I'm going to take my comb tool and I'm going to dip it in water and score and slip. When you score and slip like this process, with scratching and dunking it in the water, you really don't need like an extra container of slip to lay down. This is like, does the job on its own. And remember, the slipping acts like glue and really helps hold the surface of the clay together. So your scoring and slipping doesn't have to be beautiful and perfect. It just needs to have kind of some of this clay sludge to be able to stick together now. I'm going to dry off my fingers a little bit because I don't want them to feel slippy on the clay surface. And then I'm going to work now on attaching the two pieces together. So like I said before, anytime you're handling the clay slab, you want to be very gentle and be careful not to pinch. But I'm going to take the two surfaces, and you can see how the beveled angle now really helps them line up and match really well. Okay, now I'm going to flip it back over. This is how the shape is going to be once the vessel is created. So I'm going to try to leave it like this. And now I'm going to take that seam and really work on blending it in together. And this is brand new clay, so it's feeling pretty wet now that I've added the slip and water to it. So before I go back through and blend in too much, it is starting to kind of feel a little wobbly. So I think I'm going to go ahead and take the hair dryer to it just a little bit. I don't want to dry it out too much, but just to help me with making it a little bit more workable. You don't need to dry it for long, and you want to make sure that you are constantly filling the surface area while you're drying it, because you don't want to dry it out too much. Okay, you'll see that that was super quick. Like I said, it didn't need it too much, but I just needed it to set up a little bit firmer so it wasn't so wobbly. Now what I'm going to do is I feel a little bit better about turning it on its side again now. It's feeling a little bit more structurally sound. And now I'm going to use one of my tools to help smooth the seam in together. You can use your thumb to do this, but a lot of times when you're using your thumb to do this, it's to get enough pressure to pull the clay over and to fill the seam, you're going to end up putting too many indents into it. So it really works a lot better to use a clay tool that has a rounded, smooth edge that's kind of like the shape of your thumb to help you pull that clay in a lot more efficiently. Okay, so you see that I'm pulling the clay in one direction right now. You can still see the seam a little bit, so I'm going to actually take the tool and pull from the opposite direction. You're going to need to do this from the inside as well to really make sure that that seam is nice and sealed. You can take your rib tool to help you smooth again. You always want to make sure your rib tool is nice and clean before you rub it over the surface of your clay though, or else it could create like deep scratches that you don't want there within your clay. If you're having a really hard time with really creating a tight seam here and filling in where that crack is, you can always take a very thin coil and lay in that area and then smooth it in to help seal this nice and tight. Okay, so now I'm going to very carefully and gently flip it over so I can smooth in the crease from the inside. And I am going to kind of pinch just lightly first, and there's a little bit of excess clay on the inside, so it's not too hard for me to just use my hands for this part to get it started, and then I'll go back in with my tool. So now it helps to reach in and use your tool for smoothing out. And you just need to be aware as you're working, even if you have this at like a nice tight seal in here, you do want to be aware as you're working with the slab and moving it around that this is going to be a slightly weaker area until it's fired. So just be always be gentle and careful with your clay as you're working. Really, at any stage of the drying process, you need to be really careful with your project and gentle with it. Okay, so what's really neat about the CircleMatic templates is when you look at the template, it has very like sharp, straight edges because of the paper. But the quality and nature of the clay really allows you at this point to manipulate the shape. So for my picture, I really want the shape to be more rounded instead of having it such a harsh angle right here. And I think I want it to be rounded out a little bit more on the bottom. So what you can do now, it's the perfect drying rate right now to really work with the shape. So I'm going to reach in and I'm going to push on the inside of the clay, and I'm going to hold it steady on the outside to kind of go around and shape it to get it perfectly rounded out on the bottom just a little bit all the way around. So I'm going to try to round it out a little bit. I only have 2 of these in class, so you do not ever need to store your work on these, but anytime you're working on getting something perfectly symmetrical all the way around, it's really helpful. So I'm going to center it on this. It's kind of like a lazy Susan with how it will spin around. And I'm going to center it on here. And then I'm going to go ahead and start kind of shaping a little bit and pushing out this bottom a little bit. You shouldn't be pushing in so hard that you're seeing too many indents of where your fingers are going on the inside, but you should be able to see that it is manipulating the shape of the clay a little bit and pushing out the shape. And you just want to make sure, like when I'm doing this right now over the seam where I connected the 2 pieces together, it is like splitting a little bit. So you just want to be aware that you're not forcing it too much. And I will probably end up taking this little bit of extra clay right here and going back over and patching it just to make sure that I'm reinforcing it and that I don't have a weak point, especially like with a pitcher, it's meant to hold water, right? So we definitely don't want to have any minor cracks within our vessel, or else it won't do a very good job. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing how this is starting to become a little bit wider on the edges right here. And I haven't gone all the way up yet, but I think I am going to now start coming up and shaping this edge right here. But this is a process. It's something that you need to take your time with doing when you're shaping the clay, because you don't ever want to force it too quickly, or else it's going to end up being wonky and your craftsmanship's going to suffer because of it. I really want to be careful that even though I'm reshaping it, I want to try not to stretch the lip out too far, because I want to make sure that my second template that I put on top is still going to fit. So it's good to I can still use this as I'm working to make sure that I'm not pulling it out too wide. it's really important that you go ahead and create and work on this bottom shape before you ever put the second template on, because you're not going to be able to reach that far into your vessel and reshape it evenly all the way around once you've gotten it that tall. So this is really important that you go ahead and do this step now and not skip it and think that you can go back and do it later. Okay, you might be able to see here where that part where the two pieces match up is cracking a little bit. Good news is it's not at all on the inside, and compressing it down from the inside, kind of reshaping it, is really helping to reinforce that area. And like I said, I'm going to go back over that weak point and fill it in with some extra clay for my next step. That'll be the very next thing I do. Okay. So it doesn't ever hurt when you're like at this point to then kind of, let me recenter it on this wheel head. Okay, it never hurts at this point to kind of step back from your project and get eye level with it to make sure that the shape is as even as you'd like all the way around. I'm pretty happy with this shape. So I think what I'm going to do next, let's see. The lip up here is slightly uneven. That's okay at this point. I'm not going to worry about that too much, but what I'm looking at right now is that the sides come out at the same angle. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this extra clay that I've set to the side, and I'm going to roll a really skinny coil. I actually think that this seam right here, I could probably grab some of that extra clay and push it over, but like I said, it never hurts to reinforce that seam, because it is going to be a weak point within your project. Okay, so I've rolled this really skinny coil right here, and I definitely don't need it that long, so I'm going to pinch a little off, and what I'm going to do is actually kind of pat it flat, because like I said, I really don't need too much clay right here. If you have too much, sometimes that makes it difficult to smooth it out and get a nice smooth surface too. So I'm going to make sure that it's about the right length. And then I'm not going to score and slip the surface right here because it's already kind of wet, but you always want to make sure when you're attaching pieces of clay together that you are slipping and scoring. So I'm going to slip and score this small little coil before I attach it. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now. I'm going to go ahead and remove it from this wheel head, kind of set this to the side, and then show you again. I don't want to, it's okay if the shape, you know, flattens out a little bit as you're handling it, because that's just going to happen. But now I'm going to use my clay tools to smooth in and really fill in that seam. The clay is at the plastic stage right now, so it will keep that kind of bubbled out shape that I went through and created, but I can reshape the roundness of it once I set it back up. I really want to work on smoothing all of this in really nice and smooth, because I'm not going to be creating any impressions or textures into the clay. For this specific project, I'm going to be doing slip trailing, and I want to have a very nice smooth surface for that design process. Okay, so that area has been reinforced now. It's still not perfectly smooth, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it back on the wheel. And I'm going to work on getting this perfectly smooth before I attach the next template. It is not going to be helpful at all smoothing this area with dipping your sponge in the water and smoothing it, especially at this point. It's only going to make your project more weak and difficult to handle. And at this point, if you add more water, you're just going to be able to see every single fingerprint super easily. So don't be fooled that water is always the answer when smoothing your clay, because most of the time it is not. Okay, so I'm utilizing the rib tool again to really help press in that coil and smooth out the surface. Okay, now I'm going to go back in and press out again to rework that shape and make sure that it's nice and round. So I'm very happy with the quality of craftsmanship and with this shape at this point. So what I'm going to do now is to make sure that it stays nice while I roll my second slab. I'm going to take the wooden board that's covered in a plastic bag, and I'm going to go ahead and take this and set it down the wooden board so I'm not constantly handling it, and I'm going to go ahead and set it to the side. And since it's going to take me some time with rolling the next slab and getting a perfect shape, I am going to take a plastic bag and go ahead and drape over it, because the longer you leave this exposed to the air, the quicker it's going to dry out, and we really don't want it to set up any much past leather hard, or else it's going to be really difficult to connect the two pieces together.